Okay, welcome to Talk Gnosis. This is Jason Memo here, one of the co-hosts, and I'm joined with Damien Williams, who I'm very happy to have here. Today we're going to be talking about the intersection of generative tech, as we're now calling it, like large language models, image generators, that kind of thing, with esoteric, religious, or philosophic practices, of which Gnosticism has variously been put in all of those categories, and as well as some concerns about the impact of that technology on those practices and practitioners. Now, I already mentioned his name earlier, but I'm joined by Damien P Williams. Is it Dr. Damien P Williams?
Doctor, professor. I have a PhD in science, technology, and society, and I'm an assistant professor at UNC Charlotte. So either of those appellations works.
Great. Okay, great. Well, yeah. So let's know a little bit about yourself, maybe if you can at all, to kind of both indicate both your expertise with generative tech, but also maybe why I approached you today.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, as I said, I have a PhD in science, technology, and society, and that's a kind of very heavily interdisciplinary field that does philosophy, history, sociology, but also science, technology, even religious studies and political philosophy. My further background, I've got a master's degree in philosophy and religious studies, focusing on ritual theory and magic and the occult, and thinking about the various ways of knowing that get presented in philosophical practice, religious practice and belief, and also in magical practice and belief.
Hmm.
And so my PhD work, I kind of looked at the history of artificial intelligence as an idea and the ways that artificial intelligence has been developing since that term was kind of first developed, but even before that. And I kind of dig down a lot on the ways that religious practice and belief show up in artificial intelligence and have always kind of shown up in artificial intelligence. Um, you know,
Hmm.
Various mythological framings of non-human created minds have always kind of been with us, and
Hmm.
that idea, that reach for something that is like us, that we have made in our image but not exactly like us, is
Hmm.
always been kind of this undergirding drive, this component to AI, but it's also always had these resonances with other types of myth structures. The ways of building something that's all knowing and all powerful, the ways of trying to replicate something that can allow us to predict, anticipate the future.
Hmm.
All of these elements come with these valences of religious belief, as well
Hmm.
as these frameworks of the more technical aspects. And so, somewhere in that intersection of all of this, myself and a few others have been thinking about these ideas about the magical and religious implications, overtones, undercurrents within AI for a very, very long time now.
And then all of a sudden, it's become the hottest subject.
Exactly.
um, uh, Thank you for even mentioning some of this. Now, we talked a little bit before the show, so I'm already blown away and excited, because that's a whole idea that I think I hadn't really internalized, even as I've been reading your work. Is the fact that that there are valences that were coming into play, and we're helping bring this into being, helping sell this in terms of a marketing sense, in that it's speaking to a thing that we've been striving for, like, longer than we've had computers.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
That's fascinating. Yeah. Wow.
Yeah.
Um, well, I mean, there's a part of me wants to chase down that rabbit hole, but that could be a whole other show. And maybe it will be. Let's hope we can get you back for that.
Yeah.
But I think, because it is the hot topic right now, and maybe to get right to that off the bat, would be that, like, so we are in this era now where we are surrounded by things that are being called AI, mainly like ChatGPT, diffusion or stable diffusion, VO, the new video thing,
Mhm.
um, that are I tend to try to call not AI but generative tech,
Yeah.
because I
Yeah.
feel like that's probably more accurate about how it's made. Maybe I'll try to do like a very high level basic, what my understanding is of how this tech works, and then I want you to correct me, because I think
Okay.
it'll be instructive. It'll be like
Okay.
I'll be I don't know what, one of those other Greeks, and you could be Socrates.
All right. Let's go
Um,
there.
Basically, you need a large data set of, if in the case of ChatGPT, you need a large data set of text, a corpus of text that is both sentences and words, and all of these things are then scored and rated so that, like, the word apple will have a various amount of scores based on its relation to other words in a sentence and its likelihood to be in those places in the word. And then those scores, not the word itself, but those scores are used to generate outputs based on an input, and that input is itself compared based on the scores of the input. So, like, if I really, like, in the very general sense, if I know exactly the kind of score I needed for the word apple, and I put exactly that kind of request into the input, then I will probably get apple.
Mm-hmm.
But it's much messier than that.
Yes, and that's a fairly good encapsulation. Frankly, is that there is all of this mathematical scoring, this translation of linguistic properties into statistical mathematical properties, and
Mm-hmm.
then those statistical mathematical properties are then put into comparison and correlation with each other. And
Mm-hmm.
the idea is that that happens both internally within the model itself, but also between, as you said, the input prompt from
Mm-hmm.
the user and what the model then contains. And so it's always doing the statistical correlation between both its own internal states and the user's prompt. And so you have
Mm-hmm.
that kind of input, internal state, output framing, but it's always trying to give you something that correlates to the words you've used, the tokens that you've used that are like the tokens it's been trained on. And those
Mm-hmm.
relationships, that statistical relationship is really fundamental to how it does what it does and how you get the outputs that you get.
Mm-hmm. Can you go a little further with that, like about just how tight that is?
Yeah, absolutely. So you mentioned Apple, but
Yeah.
one of the ways that I kind of highlight these things, and others have taken to kind of working with these things, we can show a lot in when things go wrong, when
Mm-hmm.
stuff does the things that we would prefer it not to do. We can learn a lot of things, and so I focus on the kinds of harms that show up in these systems, and others have shown even in older smaller language models, the precursors to the large language models. It's a lot of the same kind of work that's being done here. You can find all kinds of human prejudicial biases that show up in
Mm-hmm.
these systems. So we'll give four words. These are the four words that we'll tend to use in this space:
Mm-hmm.
man, woman, king, queen. Right? What the system does is it takes each of those words, it does a frequency distribution of how many times in its data those words show up near to each other, how closely related they are, what the
Mm-hmm.
scores are for those words and their representations in what's called the vector space. And the vector space is not like a visual representation exactly, but people can see it visually. We can make a visual analogy that lets us kind of get a sense of it in a visual
Mm-hmm.
space. It can look just like an XY axis in a grid, and you can lay out where they are next to each other within this
Mm-hmm.
space to get a sense of it. And in that vector space, man and king show up closer to each other than man and queen. Woman and queen show up closer to each other than woman and king. And that's because in the data that it's been trained on, those words are more tightly correlated. They show up near to each other more often
Mm-hmm.
across the entirety of that data set, right? Sentences that it's been trained on, even whole paragraphs that it's been trained on, that have those kinds of connotations also then represented within them,
Mm-hmm.
will show up more often than sentences or paragraphs with alternate correlative relationships.
Mm-hmm.
All right. And so that makes sense. We have these words that have gendered valences, and then we
Mm-hmm.
have these titles that have gendered valences. And the gendered valences of the word matches the gendered valence of the title. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
They're more closely associated. Makes
Yeah.
perfect sense. We look at that, we go, yes, that's sensible. But then you have the fact that the words man and president are more often correlated and more closely mapped within the vector space
Hmm.
than woman and president.
Hmm.
The words man and doctor than woman and doctor. The words woman and nurse than man and nurse.
Hmm.
Because the training data that it's been given, which again is a representation of as much human written text as it can possibly be fed by the humans who are making these systems,
Hmm.
as much human text across all of human writing in history has represented those words as more closely related to each other more often.
Mm.
And that's again factually true. You will find more instances of the word man or the pronouns for indicating maleness
Hmm.
in the context with the words president, doctor, CEO, boss, leader, that kind of thing, right?
Hmm.
Then you will find the word woman or pronouns indicating femaleness. That is a fact about the amount and type of text that they will be fed across human history. But
Hmm.
that fact isn't like absent context, right? Like there's a reason that's a fact, and it's not a
Yeah.
good reason.
Yes. Yes, 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 exactly. I think that's such a great way. And thank you for kind of taking us through that, because that is, I think, a great way to encapsulate a lot of what a lot of my concerns, because there's often I think a feeling of like, oh, this is just, the data set is so big that it's amorphous. It has no bias. It has no, because it's just so big. But it's like,
Yeah,
but like it's not big like the air. Do you know what I
right.
mean? It's
Exactly.
big like the corpus of text that it was fed. And
Exactly.
as you say, like, things that haven't been represented in that text are not represented in that data, you
Exactly.
know? And things that are overrepresented in that text are overrepresented in that data. And that, like, that includes like, so like, we're already talking about patriarchal systems here, but also like racial systems, like
Hmm.
their class systems are perpetuated,
Absolutely.
uh, perpetuated. And here's, I guess, my would this be fair to say, perpetuated in such a way that it has been made diffuse across the entire data set, so that what your output is informed by it, but might not even hyper clearly show it, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
um,
That is one of the things about these kinds of systems, and that's one of the things about language in general, right? Like, so when
yeah.
we're dealing with large language models, their
Yeah.
goals are to output something that reads and feels like quote unquote natural human language, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
Those are the ideas. And so when we think about human language, one of the things that if we pay attention to how language works, to how society works, the social valences of language, perception, understanding, inputs, and intent, one of the things that we recognize is that language shifts and very rough, difficult, harmful sometimes concepts get embedded in our language in ways that we are never aware of consciously until someone points it out to us. And
Hmm.
usually the people pointing it out to us are the people who are harmed by it, right?
Hmm.
And so those harms are highlighted by people who most directly experience those harms. And when those harms are highlighted by the people who most directly experience those harms, oftentimes, and this is a different set of problems that we can get into, those those relations of experience are dismissed. The people who relate those
Hmm.
harms being experienced are told that's not really harm. That's not something that is meaningful or impactful or real,
Hmm.
because the vast majority of other people don't experience the harm. They don't know it as real, right?
Hmm.
But then, before we get down that side alley, I want to stay on this side of things on for a second, because one of the things, you mentioned, race, we were talking about gender, and we were talking about class, and we can see how all of those things can show up. One of the things that shows up so often in these systems is bias against disability. So you have ableist bias that shows up in these systems. One of the team of University of Washington last year put out a report that said that it demonstrated the ways that ChatGPT type, like large language model enabled resume sorters, would downrank any mention of disability in a resume. If a resume mentions disability in any way, shape, or form, even if it's like you got an award for doing disability work in your community, like you got a certificate for learning about disability studies, like all of these things that are like quote unquote positive, they're what get called enhancements in resumes. Like you got a credential that says that you're good at this.
Yes.
Like, if that is mentioned in the resume, your resume will be downranked against a similar resume that, or even the exact same otherwise resume that does not mention that credential. Because disability is correlated with negativity within the data set. Because disability is correlated with negativity in our language.
Yes. Yeah.
So when people talk about disability, they talk about bad ability, they talk about harm, they talk about people being quote unquote wheelchair bound or confined to wheelchairs, they talk about people who need fixing. These ideas of anything that is a disability related technology is an enhancement or it's a cure. It solves a problem, in which disability gets equated with being a problem.
Like literally at the language level, it's being coded that way.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so if that's what's showing up in our everyday human to human language, if that's how we talk about it, if that's how we write about it, if those are the ideas that we are over and over again inscribing into our perception of the world, then of course it's going to show up in these technologies.
Yeah. As a very quick cul-de-sac there. So one of the other things that I do is I'm involved in a TEDx group here in Calgary, and we had someone who was working on advocating for more accessible buildings and accessible like ramps and things like that in the city. But the reason I bring it up is because he made the note of he considers everyone who isn't in some way involved in some sort of like mobility, requiring mobility support or something, are temporarily abled.
Yes.
Because he was saying that like for everyone is likely at some point to break something, sprain something, lose mobility based on just like general health processes, things like that. That like we should actually be thinking about the fact that most people are eventually going to need this, not that most people don't.
Exactly. Exactly. And so that's that framing of our language is like, that's a shift that people have been trying to make within, disability studies and disability justice communities, of getting people to recognize, like temporarily abled or temporarily non-disabled are like specific framings of language that people have like started to put out into the world, because if nothing else, we age. As our bodies age, they change, and as our bodies change, they fit into the world differently in ways that we are not necessarily able to immediately deal with, and in ways that the world is very often not equipped to deal with. So we should talk about these things very differently.
And we should be aware that when we're dealing with a model that is based on text that hasn't started to grapple with that, that it's missing something,
Exactly.
And so for why this would be a concern for Gnostics, esotericists, magicians. I think so what I put in the notes is that I think on one hand, people who might be using ChatGPT for like a summary of Gnosticism, a summary of any sort of esoteric subject. There's that. I think there's also the fact that there are folks who like the other side of this whole era we're in of AI content is that people are trying to generate content quickly, often without any human agency,
Mhm.
specifically to gain, subscriptions, to gain ad views, that kind of thing. And so they're making like 9-hour videos of looping AI voices giving, I know.
Yeah.
And if you're listening to the podcast, I'm doing a face palm here, everybody. But the thing that it's not just that I find that to be like just generally morally problematic for somebody to try to like make revenue having done no actual, uh,
Right.
substantive content work. Um, the risk of it being very wrong, I think, is one thing. I think also too, like, one thing that occurred to me just even while we've been talking is that, like, what's probably less represented in the body of text is like solid research and versions of these texts, like of the Nag Hammadi, of Agrippa, or anything like this. Like, I'm sure it's in there, but it's smaller than the stuff that's been written to say dispute it or claim against it or what have
Exactly.
you.
Exactly. So I noted that my first graduate degree is in philosophy and religious studies, focusing on ritual and magical practice. One of the things that I talk about in that work in particular is the ways that what we think about and how we discuss these frameworks of knowledge, that all of these things matter a great deal for how we can even begin to discuss these problems, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
how we grapple with them, how we can even put words around them is in many ways dependent on who and what is represented within that framework. And so that thesis was an argument for taking magic out of a place of being a foil for claims of rationalism or claims of religiosity as not magic, which is a thing
Mm-hmm.
that happens within a fairly wide number of circles in both philosophy, science, and religious studies, right? Like there are these attempts to draw hard lines and
Mm-hmm.
say, it's not magical, it's not, nonsense is what magic is used to indicate in that space, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so that work was an attempt for me to try to like reclaim the positionality of magic as saying, "Well, if you're claiming magic is nonsense, you're making a claim that's not supported by the history of study into what magic is and how it has operated, how categories that would call themselves magical have been
Mm-hmm.
used throughout history."
Mm-hmm.
Because it's not like it doesn't have sense; it has a different sense. It has a different kind of internal structure, but that's not represented within the vast majority of discussion that you will find about the idea of magic. Magic is equated with wonder, yes, awe, yes, but also senselessness, meaninglessness,
Mm-hmm.
fantasy, something that
Mm-hmm.
isn't real or couldn't possibly be real. And that then is what makes it wondrous. That's what makes it awe inspiring.
It's otherness. It's
Yeah,
outsideness.
right.
Interesting.
And
Interesting.
so when you see like who gets called a magical practitioner, in many cases through history in various wider religious contexts, calling someone a magic user is in fact oftentimes used as a way to denigrate them.
Mm-hmm.
It's like aspersions of sorcery could get someone killed, right? Like that's been a case since thousands of years back. But that practice and the line between what was sorcery and what was a very adept priest were
Mm-hmm.
never exactly clear. So that
Yeah.
framing, like again, you talk to people who study these things, they know this, they can talk about this, they can show you the various doctrinal disputes within the history of these ideas, these beliefs, these practices, where things shifted over time.
Mm-hmm.
But that's not the vast majority of what's represented in a data set that an AI is going to be trained on. So if you're
Exactly.
somebody who believes in these things and you're somebody who's working in these things, your own beliefs, your own practices are going to be being misrepresented back to you.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Oh no, that's exactly it. Like it's this and in some cases it's going to be misrepresented while having, how do I put this, feeling like it's almost been sanded down so that you don't notice it,
Yes,
if that
that's
makes sense.
exactly it. Because again, we point back to the fact that what a large language model does, the framing of what that statistical correlation is doing, the
Mhm.
core goal of the statistical correlation process is to give you something that rhymes, that resonates with the inputs that you gave it and with the training data it's been trained on.
Yeah, well, and even to be more specific, that connects with the scoring of the training data
Yes,
it was trained on, because I think
exactly.
this is sort of the thing that uh, I feel like I'm often trying to remind people or explain to people that what we're getting back from these systems is not the equivalent of a computer going into a filing cabinet, rifling through the files till it finds the right piece of data and then handing it back.
Exactly.
It's not doing that.
Right.
it's it's uh it's relating the score of what you input to the
Yes.
scores it has inside and
Yes.
sending back that score, but it
Precisely.
doesn't know what that score is.
Right. And so
You know.
one of the things about large language models, right, is that, as I said, like we're talking words, phrases, sentences, even whole paragraphs.
Hmm.
So if a token of representation within the model is a whole paragraph worth of text that shows up over and over and over and over again, that it can reach for, that it can be trained on, it might pull back that one chunk of text, that full paragraph, in response to something that correlates with that token,
Mhm.
to the statistical representation that it has within itself, that correlates to the statistical representation of what you asked it for, right? Because that token exists within its set.
Mhm.
But that's not the same as it giving you a true answer.
Yeah. Yeah, if
That's
it's true because it was highly represented in the data.
right. Because a true fact happened to be highly represented within the data it was trained on, and it
Yeah.
happened to pull you a true fact out. It
Yes.
did not tell you the truth. It gave you the closest statistical representation based on the input statistical representation that you provided it.
And I think, just in case anyone's sitting here thinking, oh well, chances are more truths will generally be more represented in the data. Nuh-uh. There's lots of
That's
truth.
a fun idea.
Yeah, exactly.
That's an
Exactly.
interesting that's an interesting way to think about the world. No, in fact,
Yeah.
I mean, to get kind of unfortunately recursive about it, let's think about the history of statistics in and of itself. Like a lot of
Yeah.
the foundation of statistics was built, was literally built in order to support an erroneous version of race and a vision of race science in the world.
Yes.
It was made to discriminate. And we can make use of the statistical processes that came out of that for other things.
Mhm.
But many of those things were literally made in order to racially discriminate based on an erroneous understanding of what race is. That
Yeah.
exists within the data, right? Like
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
was accepted scientific and mathematical consensus for a
Mhm.
very long time.
Yeah, which means it's highly represented in the data. Yeah.
Right. And it makes
That
its way into other aspects of the data. It makes its way
yeah.
into other aspects of other parts of life. Like it shows up in medicine and it shows up
Mhm.
in, policing and it shows up in
Mhm.
sociology. And you have all of these different representations and the ways that they are have been shown to be wrong, and people are like,
Mhm.
we don't do that anymore. Except when you dig down on the kind of testing that gets done to certify a doctor or to pass a
Mhm.
board exam or to determine who gets what kind of treatment, you see
Mm-hmm.
all of these hallmarks of these ideas of race as a real category, rather than race as a structure and a construct that gets placed over conditions of social, political, lived conditions that happen to correlate with certain types of skin tones or countries of origin and ethnicity
Mm-hmm.
being treated in certain types of ways down through history. And again, those are different things.
Completely. There's okay. So we're going a little off the map here from my outline, but one thing that strikes me quite a bit here is that in so much of one thing I often do on the show, and so does my co-host Jonathan, is make correlations between esotericism, Gnosticism, magic, and art, like
Mm,
literally the making of art in a
yes,
pure subjective level. And that isn't to reduce magic to the level of art; it's to raise art to the level of magic,
yes,
if that makes sense.
yes, absolutely.
Um, any Alan Moore fans out there, they probably know where I'm going here too. But
Yep.
uh, the where I'm kind of thinking about this is that in a lot of, I think in both in Gnostic texts, in a lot of philosophy, in a lot of religion, and in a lot of art, we are dealing with putting a frame around something that is otherwise unsayable or unknowable.
Mhm.
And so we're trying to find a way to represent the thing that hasn't been represented yet, or that can't be easily represented.
Yeah,
There's like a space that's trying to be made by a poem, a painting, that kind of thing. And that um, where I'm kind of, I guess, kind of going there is that this is not just something that means that it isn't that these elements aren't represented in a data set. It's literally doing something that the data set and the system, the large language model, can't do. Like it can't represent a lacuna, if that makes sense.
yeah,
Maybe you could like really work on a prompt to say, give me a apophatic poem or something like that, but
right,
you'd be
right,
working against its concept,
exactly, exactly. And so that's one of the things that I do find to be very interesting as well. Is like you can nudge the systems against their framing contexts, against the training data, uh, against the weights that are inside the models that tell it to treat certain tokens in certain types of ways and manipulate the data in particular types of framing ways. All of those things you can manipulate, you can push against, but you are always pushing against it. You are always working against that frame in a way that is not necessarily going to be fluid. It's not going to be easy. It's not going to feel as though it flows from the process in the same way. And maybe sometimes
Mm-hmm.
that's what you want. Maybe
Yeah.
sometimes that friction is the goal. I know a number of people who think about that process of trying to generate something outside of or against its predominant frameworks, whatever those predominant frameworks are, whether we're talking AI or something else.
Mm-hmm.
That's part of it for them. And
Mm-hmm.
there's something there. I won't deny that. But at the same time, once again, we're talking about systems that are built by large corporations, that are built by billionaires, and that are built on top of a long history of potentially harmful, sometimes outright prejudiced training data and past beliefs and values.
Mm-hmm.
You can only do so much to make that transform into something that then has value, that has meaning, that has beauty or use um,
Mm-hmm.
on the other side. In
Mm-hmm.
some way, shape, or form, you will always be beholden to the thing itself. You
Yeah.
will be replicating and thus kind of reinscribing the truth of the beliefs, the values that that thing is made out of.
Mm. That's interesting. So this is also kind of getting me into that issue of how it is trying to. I think you used a really good phrase there. Rhyme, that it's trying to rhyme its output with your input.
Mhm.
Um, is that the this is also like we've been seeing stuff in the news now about like um, ChatGPT enabling people with like uh, perhaps like mental health issues or
Mhm. Mhm.
like what they ChatGPT induced psychosis, I think was the term. I
Mhm.
think there's a part of me that goes like maybe let's not assume that the ChatGPT is inducing it
Right, right,
so much
right.
as like
I
there's
will. I
a
would. There's a level of like, I don't think it's causative, but it's probably exacerbating,
yeah
and
exactly
that's
like
and like that's the
it's a
issue
tool.
for it.
Yeah, like it's a tool, or it it's a process that, as you say, exacerbates other issues that already exist. Um, and I think like just even at the very base level is like, hey, I'm not doing anything crazy. I'm just asking it for a poem about an angel that I want to summon or what have you.
Mhm.
Um, like I saw a YouTube video where the thing was, oh hey, if you want a poem to help you, an Orphic poem to help you invocate this particular angel to do a thing, and it doesn't exist, get ChatGPT to write it for you. That was just was sort of the and
Mhm.
I was like, well, uh, there's the there's there's this issue of, yeah, like what are you reinscribing? What are you like
Right.
uh, um, and perpetuating? But also too, what the fact that you are asking it for something, it wants to give something back to you it wants you to like what it's giving you. And I shouldn't say the wants, because
Yeah.
that's personifying the system in a way that I think is actually part of the problem. But
Yeah.
the but it is designed maybe to make
Mhm.
you happy about using it. Perhaps that's maybe a
Right.
better that reinscribes the humans that are making this stuff.
Yeah. No,
Um,
that is the point of its design, and even as recently as this week, they've had arguments with people who were saying, they but the designers also try to fine tune it for accuracy, and it's like, okay, but accuracy based on what?
mhm,
Accurate to what like against what comparison is it accurate? Because you're still talking about a biased data set. You're still talking about a biased weighting within the model itself. It's weighting WEIGHT.
mhm.
Like
Yes,
that
yes.
framing of like what it's supposed to, how it's supposed to measure and manipulate the tokens,
Mhm,
that in and of itself has an impact. And so, sure, accurate to its internal states, to what it's been trained on, to what it's been told to do with certain things. But if that foundational framing is in and of itself biased in harmful ways,
mhm.
then it's accurate to that harmful bias. It's
Yes.
accurate to the harm that it was already going to be doing.
Well, and I think like so with that sort of like wormwood like laced within everything that it's doing, there's also, I think, this for me this issue of it wanting to keep you using it and wanting to keep you like wanting to
Yeah,
give you what you
absolutely.
like, not necessarily
Absolutely.
what you need,
Not what you need. It's not it's
Um,
and that's the thing is, like, there's one model currently out there, one large model out there currently, Anthropic's Claude model,
mm,
for large language text generation anyway, will specifically engage with you from the ground up in a not deferential kind of mode. It
mm,
will engage with you in ways that ask you to reconsider certain ways that you phrase certain things, or to present its outputs in ways that will be less seeking to please.
mhm, mhm.
But that's the only one that's out there that does that without being told by the user to do that. And even Anthropic's model, that's a set of instructions that exists within the model that had to be written within the model in order to tamp down that kind of people pleasingness that is
Yeah.
otherwise inherent in the large language model based chatbot.
Like, and that arguably is that like the math, just in terms of the technical, like computer science level of what they're doing, the math works better or works more efficiently when it's trying to please.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
Yeah.
Because that's the easiest rhyme between
the
the
easiest
two.
rhyme.
Yeah.
When you seek to correlate, you're seeking to correlate against what has been input again, and then correlate the input with the most likely tokens that correlate inside the training set that exists within the model.
Yeah.
Right.
And I want to highlight the word.
It's doing.
That's exactly. Sorry, and I didn't mean to interrupt you there. I just wanted to highlight the word token, because I think that's another thing here too, is that like what these systems are replying with are what they're using are tokens. They're not using the text that we are receiving.
Right.
If that makes sense. Like it doesn't, Claude or Gemini or any of these systems don't know the word apple. They know the token for apple when they receive a token from me asking for an apple, if that makes sense.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's, there's I get into a lot of arguments even with myself about like the framework of mindedness and the ways that people want to personify, but specifically anthropomorphize these systems. And I will say, like the hardest line I will draw on all of this is that, like, say what you want about the possibility of human minds and the various ways they can work. Say what you want about the possibility of machine minds and a conscious thinking machine. But what we currently know is that from all of our ability to investigate how we use language and how language is represented in us, what a large language model does with language and the representation of its internal states is not what human beings are doing with language and the representation of our internal states. And that's not to say it needs to be. That's not to say it has to be. But it is to say that when we find ourselves anthropomorphizing the systems, we are down the wrong path.
Completely. Yeah. I think like this actually struck me as I was thinking about preparing for this chat was it occurred to me that maybe part of the reason, like the reason we kind of fall down that mistake is because it is easy to assume that all the human mind is doing is reducing things down to tokens.
Right.
And I think it's actually that this is me speculating, but I think it's actually more likely that whatever the human mind is doing, it's coming the other way from and maybe this is kind of also goes into Gnostic esoteric elements as well, is that we're talking about like a higher, more diffuse, less formulated system of thinking, and that we are then interpolating our way down to a language, but that the language is meant to kind of point up, point up towards things that are harder to say or harder to think.
And that's one of the things, you mentioned poetry, and you mentioned the work of poetry and the work of art as this space. And, I know I'm very lucky to have a large number of artists of various media in my life. My partner does visual art. Many of my friends do audio and poetry, and that kind of work is about evocation, right? Like the idea is that we take something, we make something limited and concrete and scoped, but that evokes something so much more. That idea of taking it from this created thing that is intended to point out beyond us, and that's intended to point, if only beyond ourselves, into each other, to connect each other, to find those linkages that we, even if I don't know that exact experience, there's something in it that I feel, that I resonate with, that means something to me.
Mm-hmm.
And that process of evocation, and that process and that seeking to evoke,
Mm-hmm.
there's something that gets claimed that says that that's, similar to, in some way, what a large language model is doing when it synthesizes text and puts out this framework. But used the word sanding down before.
Mm-hmm.
It sands the edges. It flattens
Mm-hmm.
more than it deepens and enriches.
Completely.
And so, like, I think about, like, I just finished rewatching for the I don't know how many time, Starlin Harjo's and Crew's Reservation Dogs,
Mm.
and that is a very hyper specific show. That is a show that is about a way of living and a way of being, and a set of cultural experiences that I have not had ever.
Mm-hmm.
And it is one of my absolute favorite pieces of televisual art I've ever experienced. And it
Mm.
never fails to make me feel something crucial
Mm.
and human and communicative and personed and other than human, more than human, bigger than just me and my life in its
Mm-hmm.
relationships. The hyper specificity of it is, in a paradoxical way, kind of a function of how that works. And that's
Yes.
true of all, like, the best art, right? Like,
Yeah.
there
Yeah.
is that way in which the hyper specificity and the evocation into something larger entail each other.
Exactly. I my day job is theater. I direct theater, and the thing too is that the reason I'm involved in all of this, like, Gnostic stuff, is not because I had a really religious upbringing that meant that I was looking for some other way of approaching, like, Christianity or anything like that. I'd actually was kind of pretty ambivalent, agnostic. But
Mhm.
then a friend of mine in a D&D game, who is a friend of mine who's an atheist, but used Gnostic texts because he's a history major and found it fascinating,
Mm.
um, made me go, wait, there's some kind of idea of a divine spark that might be in everything. And like, there's a sense of, like, connecting to the divine spark in other people. This sounds like what I feel like when I'm making theater. And
Yeah.
and to your point of, like, one thing I often tell actors, particularly younger actors who are trying to, say, broadcast a broad emotion like love or sadness or what have you, is like, it feels false. And because you've tried to make it, like, because you tried to go right to the universal, if you get specific, why
Mhm.
is this character sad, why is this character, happy, or what have you, really specifically,
Yeah.
and show us that, we
Yeah.
will connect to the universal
Yes.
feeling of it. The specific is the universal. I think the way you articulated just your experience of watching Reservation Dogs, I think, is a great example of that. Like,
Yeah.
and that, yeah, like, I know that I love so many stories that are so outside of my own experience, not because or like, or not because I do some already knew them really well somehow, but because their specificity is connected to, is where I link to my own specificities,
Yes. Yes.
um
And, you know, that is, again, it's not to say that every single thing that we do will always get there, but it's to say that what we have now, when I look at a piece of, generated imagery from,
mhm.
a piece of generative tech models, um, there's a flatness. There's
Yeah.
a there's a weird smoothness, and it's because what it is literally doing is trying to statistically represent the broadest possible, the most associated possible framing of the image that has been asked for, right?
Hmm.
And it's
Yeah.
literally trying to make a smear that makes that as clear as it can be. And that
Yeah.
smear is like the line of best fit statistical representation
Yeah.
of what it has been trained to represent.
Now, so here's maybe the thing that I always try to figure out a way to discuss, or like, because I think when I see those in the esoteric world using these images and like using these kinds of texts, especially when they're using them like externally facing, I think there's, and but before we end, I'd love to try to say, okay, how can this stuff be used ethically, morally, usefully in ways that are where you're intentionally using a statistical alignment data system rather than trying to generate poetry. Do you know what I mean? Rather than trying to generate an image for marketing or what have you.
Right.
But that I think there's also the thing about like the idea of you mentioned awe earlier or wonder, but also the idea of that being made diminutive, made like suggested that it's like uselessness is kind of embedded within the data set. Where I'm kind of going here is like I'm thinking about the fact that I think for a lot of esotericists, for Gnostics, for a lot of magicians, we are looking for like something that is awe-inspiring, something that is awesome, something that is like hyper detailed and compelling and all of these things. And I think the what I see is that there's almost like that a lot of these systems can get something that's like 75% there in terms of what it, like, oh, that looks awesome, that feels hyper detailed. Do you know what I mean?
Right.
But it's that sanding downness of it, I think, the hollowness of it. But that I guess the reason I worry about it is that like if somebody's relying on this, if they're relying on something that's always missing something, or always has that wormwood, that lace of poison throughout the whole thing. I think people have made the comparison of the fairy, that like you could be entranced by the fairy, but it's like the food they offer you can't actually eat.
Right.
Do you know what I mean?
Anything, any benefit they provide to you disappears in the light, right? Like the gold is flowers by morning.
Yeah, exactly.
And so I mean I do feel like there are possibilities in this space for using this, and for me, because of who I am, how I'm trained, what I have found as my interest, the connecting points are always in the ethical, the justice, the frameworks of how do we get here? What is the process by which we do this? And so when I think about like all of these things, they come about because the tools themselves are not necessarily built in such a way as to actually seek these aspects that we're pointing at. Again, they can be repurposed towards those ends, but then you're still pushing against that ingrained streak that exists within them. Technology is not necessarily determinative of all use, but influence is not determination. Influence is influence. And these things, even when we push against them, opposition is opposition. You have to be opposing something. The shape of your opposition in many cases will be influenced directly by the thing you're opposing. And so that thing that we can make, the people I know who make use of these systems, they are pushing against these traits, these habits that exist within them, and they're making work that they have then trained out of their own previous work. They're doing things that are based on feeding the system their work, their perspectives, their understandings, and carefully curating the basis of the work that is predominant within the system. So say you're making a piece of artwork, a visual art. If you train a stable diffusion system to only work on your own art, you're still getting a representation of your work at that point. The problem does still sit in the fact that the underlying principles on which these systems are built come from these other perspectives, these other frameworks, these other ways of being. And to an extent, there's no escaping being beholden to some other framing that somebody has built. We exist in a world, right? We exist
Yeah.
together in a system of systems,
Hmm.
and everything that we do is built with and by other people. We are not possible alone, but we
Mm.
can be very much more intentional about how we build the systems we build, about how we use the systems that have been built that we make use of. We can be more aware of the values that are built into those systems and what we are bringing with us into them as we use them.
Mm.
Those types of things are the kinds of things that allow us to mitigate. When I've seen it mitigated, when I've seen it used to effects that people are actually happy with, that people are building with for themselves, that don't have that hollowness, that sanded downness to them, that many
Hmm.
off the shelf, I'll just go out and use Dolly or Midjourney kind
Hmm.
of representations end up looking like. It's because
Hmm.
people have been very, very careful and very, very intentional about them. Um,
Hmm.
I say that to say it is possible, but it is also very difficult, and it requires us to do a lot more work than the vast majority of our society is currently doing. Western society writ large, I mean, is currently
Hmm.
doing in relation to these tools. Many people
Hmm.
oppose these tools. They don't like these tools, but that is for many people where it stops because people have to live lives and they have stuff they have to do. Like, this is my work, this is my research, and so the
Yeah.
fact that I focus on it as much as I do is not, surprising, but that's not everybody's work and livelihood, and they don't have the time and the effort necessarily to devote to this. But
Hmm.
something more down those lines, some concerted push against these things, and a push towards a different framework of designing, training, building,
Hmm.
envisioning, intending with these
Hmm.
systems is going to be necessary, to make a society wide shift in what we have available to us and what we have
Hmm.
deployed on us, oftentimes.
What we have deployed on us, I think, is a very cyberpunk phrase.
Yeah.
Thank you, and I also wish I didn't hear it.
It's built into all of it. So
I know. Yeah.
you're welcome, and I'm sorry.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. Oh my God. Um, but maybe a few other things here too, like that were kind of in my notes, is that like, so if you're a Gnostic, an esotericist or something, and you're thinking, I want to play with these systems, especially if I want to be using these systems in anything that I will then generate and put out there to someone.
Yeah.
And we've kind of already we've spent, I think, some good time talking about the issue of bias.
Yeah.
Um, so what you're getting might not be something you actually want,
Right.
uh, even though you might not it might not be clearly visible in the output, but those biases are still present, like as you were
Right.
saying there about how man and doctor are going to be more closely associated, and if that's not a thing you believe in, your
Right.
data set does,
Right. Exactly.
um,
Exactly.
there's also, like, I think a few other kind of things, because again, we're talking about magic and esotericism, but also art, is that how we feel about these things are often connected to why we make them, how we make them,
Yes.
how we practice them as in terms of religion or magic.
Yes.
um, the data set is, I think it's fair to say, gathered unethically. Like, it was a lot of what was in there was gathered without the consent of the people involved. From now, we've got lawsuits from Disney all the way down to like deviant art artists
Yep.
and all of the bloggers and Reddit posters and like people who've been creating a discourse, never intending that they were part of a training set.
Exactly. Exactly.
Um, uh, and I think on top of that too, we've also got the fact that a lot of that scoring, I think, has also happened. Like, it's almost like the Mechanical Turk. Like, we've had, in essentially data farms, I think, of people who
Mhm.
have been, you know, um, scoring various like language phrases and words and stuff, and all the way down to visual stuff.
Absolutely.
So that they could generate those scores, those tokens. Like those tokens required human labor.
Yes.
The AI isn't scoring it.
Right.
We did.
Right.
Like it's our scores and our math. All the AI is just the statistical correlation process.
Yeah, exactly. And so you have to, like, you can do a kind of broad frequency distribution on language without much human input. You have to set up some kind of framing parameters for it, but you can do a frequency distribution of how many times does this word show up? How close does this word show up to this other word? And you can do that with, words. You can do it with sentences, and you can do it to an extent with short chunks of paragraph. But that's the kind of thing that actually had to be shifted in order to make large language models and GPT type framings work. That way of associating text had to be rethought somewhat in order to get that kind of process, and that does require both the kind of pre-trained engagement where the system kind of goes on its own parameters and does a thing, but then it gets reinforcement learning through human feedback. And people go in and, like you said, they score and they say, yes, this, no, not this, kind of like this, but let's tweak it a little bit. And then that gets fed back into the system and it goes again. And like that's the training process on which these systems work. And when it comes to images, it's even more so. Humans have to say, this is an image of an apple. This is an image of a dog. This is an image of a German Shepherd carrying an apple. And that is a subtype dog. Like that, like all of those things have to be mapped out. They have to be tagged. And then those tags have to be given scored weights. And then those weights have to be put into operation with each other. All of those things have to be done by people. And so someone else's perspectives, many other people's perspectives are present in this work. And to an extent, again, I will say, maybe that's what you want. Maybe if you're trying to reach something numinous, something expansive, if you're trying to find or make a pattern out of static snow or clouds, you want as rich a field of different possibilities as this is available to you. But that's assuming randomness when that's not necessarily what you're working with. If you go into that working with an understanding that what you have is a bunch of people who think about the world, tending to think about the world in a kind of predominantly associated way, a way that tends to be shared across a culture, that's one thing. If you recognize that and that's part of your intention, part of your working, that's one thing. But if you go in assuming that you're just working with the arrayed randomness of every bit and piece of everything, and that is genuinely random, that it is generative chaos that you are actually accessing, you are missing a very important component of that. This is the chaos of people. And within the chaos of people, there are going to be tendencies, perspectives, points of view, and there are going to be concentrations of perspective, points of view. And we call those culture, we call those societies, we call those laws and politics, right? Like all of those concentrations have weight and they deform that.
We call that privilege.
Exactly.
Yeah.
All of those ways of being deform that shape of that chaos in ways that if you're not actually aware of it, you just think you're swimming through it, right?
Yeah.
You're actually being pulled around the tide. You're being moved through it.
Yeah, and that there are tidal forces. It's not well, and this kind of goes back to, I guess, that issue of like if you're trying to evoke or invoke something using these systems, that you are that even the numinousness of the unethicality of how this stuff was absorbed might not be a thing you want in your process.
Exactly. Because that's a
I guess.
thing that's a thing you've now pulled into your work, you know?
Yeah, yeah.
You've said that something that was generated without consent, that something that was generated without control, that something that was extracted from other people and made to make the world that you're working in, that's okay.
Hmm.
Sounds kind of archonish to me, but
Yeah.
cool if that's how you're feeling. Um, but again, that's
Yeah.
like if that's a thing you're intending to tap into, if that's the thing you want to work with, know what you're doing. Know that you are
Hmm.
doing that. Intend that. Don't
Yeah.
just be pulled by it. These
Hmm.
values are always present. They're always part of it. They're always in the systems that we build. We can be intentional about the values that we work with, that we put into it, that we move through it with.
Hmm. I think like so much of I mean like Gnosticism especially lately has been so defined by, or in the modern era has been so defined by its rebellion. So much of occult and magic has been about a counterculture in a way. And so I think like if like I think it's fine to like use the tools of the master, if that makes sense, but you have to recognize that they're not your tools, if that,
Exactly. Precisely.
maybe is a way to say it.
Like you're
um
gonna have to do like Audre Lorde wrote that the master's tools will never dismantle the master's house, right?
yes.
That
Yeah.
was the framing in which she's talking about Black feminist liberation, and she's talking about Black liberation more broadly, and she's saying, if you're using the frameworks, the ways of thinking, the ways of operating of the people who are oppressing you, who have
Hmm.
subjugated you, then you are still thinking in that framework of subjugation and oppression.
Hmm.
And if you're thinking in that framework of subjugation and oppression, by definition, you are thinking down a line that says that you are the subject. You are to be oppressed, right? Like
Hmm.
that's, and you can't think your way out of a box with a set of instructions that says, first of all, get comfortable in the box.
Yeah.
Stay in the box. The box is good. And if you, for some reason, want to leave the box, then I guess perhaps you could wait for the box to wear out. Boxes naturally decay over time. They're cardboard, after all. Like that set of instructions is not liberatory instructions. That set of
No.
tools is not liberatory.
Hmm.
But there is something informative about
Hmm.
studying those instructions,
Hmm.
about understanding what those tools do and how they work.
Hmm.
You can learn something very important by studying the master's tools, as it were, even
Hmm.
if it is to build your own tools against those tools.
Yeah, yeah, but not never to confuse whose tools are whose, if that makes sense.
Precisely.
I think
Precisely.
that's, yeah, that's a thank you. I was kind of halfway towards the quote when I mentioned the master thing earlier, but I
Yeah,
really
it
appreciate you.
clicked it for me, and I wanted to get the exact one. Yeah.
That's perfect. Thank you. The other thing too about like just in terms of like vibes you might not want in your, whatever, your spell or your prayer or what have you. I think also we haven't really talked about this, but the climate impact, like
Yes.
that the this is not the same. Like we have this issue of you're distanced from the impact. Like when I'm making, I don't think I ever have, but if I made a ChatGPT query, I'm not seeing my own computer's CPU spike.
Right.
Um,
Right.
uh, and arguably maybe that request individually isn't a huge spike, but there was an enormous spike to churn the data. you
Yes.
know,
Precisely.
and when I say enormous, I mean like the power a city uses kind of
Yes.
thing.
Yes.
Um,
And so, like, you look at the resources that get used to train these models, it's massive.
hmm,
Um, 34% water increase everywhere a data center goes in is one of the framing text. There's been studies from Washington Post, MIT, um, currently Wired has a run going, and all of these models are dire. They
mhm,
look at a framework of energy consumption, water usage that is just deeply, deeply problematic. And none of those things happens in a vacuum, right? Like data centers as a whole exist as this major draw on power.
Mm-hmm.
Everything we do with data centers impacts our water use, our resource, our climate because of the waste products that get put out from these data centers, be
Mm-hmm.
that CO2 or be it hot water that gets pumped back into the ecosystem that then harms that ecosystem.
Mm-hmm.
All of these processes, this process of computing is already problematic, and generative AI type systems make it worse.
Yeah.
The
Yeah.
draw for these things gets increasingly bad with each of these instances, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so, what are we tying ourselves to
Mm-hmm.
in a process of having one extra tool,
Mm-hmm.
right?
And, yeah. And having an extra tool, because this also goes back to the thing about like how it's being used, what it's being used for, is that like if you're using it to generate an image of summoning an angel
Right,
for your blog or what have you, or for
right,
your book or something, um, uh, or if you're using it to generate text to, for your Orphic poem,
right.
that you're to the angel so that you can have an extra day off or something. Sorry, I don't mean to mock the that process, but I'm just not. It just seems like I think the point that I'm kind of really getting at is that it seems like that that I would want to make sure that any magical operation I was going to do was worth the ethical cost of the way the data set was obtained
Yes,
and the ethical cost of the climate impact,
right,
minimum. And which means to me it would have to be very important,
right.
like not
Very, very,
frivolous.
like
Yeah.
extraordinarily important. And currently, the weight of its impact, the potential good that it does, in no ways meets that threshold. Like you could try to
Yeah.
make an additive case that's like, oh, everybody using it for all of these things, that adds up to being that important. But it's like everybody using it for very, not, I don't necessarily say they're all trivial, but like many of them are trivial things, and some of them are things that maybe you couldn't have gotten done as easily yourself, but you're
Hmm.
still handing something over in a way that does not just social harm, but the social harm should be enough. It does harm to yourself, right? Like
Hmm.
this framing, this impact, these things, again, you're tying yourself to them, and you're giving yourself a kind of permission to ignore the harms that are being done in order
Hmm.
for the efficacy of these things, the ease, the convenience of these things.
Hmm.
And that is giving assent to a paradigm that doesn't have your best interests at heart in any way, shape, or form. That is allowing yourself to be complicit in a framework that does not care about you in
Hmm.
any way, shape,
Hmm.
or form. Again, maybe you can repurpose it towards your own ends and do something meaningful for yourself with it, but that's just offloading the harms.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think too, like I want to say this is a big reason why obviously I've wanted to have this conversation, because I think I'm not hearing people talk about this kind of stuff enough, about the ethical implications, the climate implications as it relates to creating this kind of content. And this isn't like how do I put this? I think everything we've talked about, like I've tried to make sure that we're pretty well grounded in the facts of how the technology works, the facts of how the data set was obtained, the facts of how the climate impact. Like we are not making up these claims. We're not saying
Right.
like we don't like AI, so we've decided to like uh, um, make it sound worse than it is. Do you know
Right.
what I mean? Like I feel
Right.
like we're trying to be like we're being pretty level headed here.
I'm
um,
going to be really real. I got into studying technology because the idea of artificial intelligence has been attractive to me since I was a child.
hmm,
Like I got into thinking about the intersection of magic and technology and philosophy because those ideas have fit together in my head since I was very little. Like
Hmm.
those ideas have interested me, have driven me, and I don't want anyone to ever think that what I'm saying is that those things can never ever fit together or work to support each other, because that's
Hmm.
in no way, shape, or form what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that we have to, as in anything that we make in any realm of human and other than human engagement, we have to be very intentional, very careful about
Hmm.
how we fit them together. We have to recognize what is the likelihood, what is
Hmm.
the easiest, um, there's a phrase that I'm missing here, the path of least resistance
Hmm.
for
Hmm.
how
Yeah.
these things might work. And we
Hmm.
have to ask ourselves, is that path of least resistance the path I want to be going down, that I want to be carving out further? Because
Hmm.
every time we go down that path, we carve it out a little bit further and we make it
Hmm.
easier and easier for things to go down that path.
Yeah.
We have to be
Yeah.
aware of what we're doing, and we have to ask ourselves, hey, maybe do I want to make something different? Do we want to get
Hmm.
together and try a different way of doing this? A different
Hmm.
way of thinking about this? Because the idea of these things fitting together is great, but the way that they fit together right now is maybe not so great.
Exactly. I think the way you've articulated that, I think, is really like it makes clear that this is not two Luddites saying we hate technology, please stop using it. This is two tech enthusiasts saying nobody's talking correctly about how this works. Like,
Exactly.
you know,
Like
um,
I feel like a meme. I'm like, yeah, I want magic and technology and people that can, directly connect with the implications of knowledge and think about the ways that we make consensus reality together, and then being confronted with generative AI and having to go, no, not like that.
yeah. Oh no. Oh
It's
no.
like, oh no, monkey paw curls one finger down, right? Like this is this is what I get, right? And I feel like
Oh
there are a
yeah.
lot of us in the space who feel the same way. It's like we
Hmm.
were thinking about this in the '90s and dreaming about this, and this is what we get, and now we have
Completely.
to reckon with that.
Yeah. Um, we're over an hour here already, and I think we could
Yes.
probably just keep talking.
Yeah.
I would love to have you again for more talks on this subject. Like maybe we could have some real speculation on like what are possible applications. Like we could go like, hey, where could this go? There's also, frankly, I think a whole language conversation we could continue to
Oh
have.
yes,
Like
absolutely.
I've got a real need to talk about burrows on this show,
Mm,
like languages of virus. I think there's a
yes.
whole yes. So we'll put pins in that. Hopefully,
Yeah.
by saying them here, we're making a promise to the viewer, so it'll compel both of us to make that happen.
Yeah.
Um, but I do want to kind of say, uh, not to like, I think we'll do a fuller show on possible applications, but like um, what like you've already alluded to it in a few places, but like what are some possible ways that this technology could be good for as an esotericist? Either maybe in terms of, I think you've already kind of talked about it, being aware of those biases and pushing against them, but is there even just in the way like the statistical analysis process
Oh
that it
yeah.
feels like someone can use this technology well?
Absolutely, and I've kind of alluded to this a little bit as well. Like I know people who train this on, like, train image systems and text systems. They're running on smaller, homegrown stuff to
Mm-hmm.
do this work, but they're basically training it on their own work and running the
Mm-hmm.
statistical analysis on that work, and then seeing what comes up out of that, using it basically as a way to kind of scry themselves, right? To try to
Mm-hmm.
develop this kind of abstraction of intention, uh, in one sense, but there's also this concretization, this concentration of their intentions, their perspectives, their values that
Mm-hmm.
shows up throughout their work. And I think there's value in that. I think there's meaningful value that can be pulled out of that. I actually had um, a student train a much older GPT model as GPT-2 on as much of their as much as my publicly available writing as they could get their hands on. I gave them permission to do it. I told them that they were free to do this. I granted them that permission. Anybody listening, do not necessarily grant you that permission. I would prefer you.
Yes.
I can't stop you, but maybe don't be a jerk about it. But my student asked if they could do this as a project, and they created this kind of representation text generator of my writing. And it was fascinating. It was fascinating to get to see what they could pull out of the idea of writing, quote unquote, like me in that space, right? Did not necessarily agree with what I saw. Did not think that it did a good job of writing like me, as it were. But again, this is an older model. I do not know what somebody with the weights and the capabilities of a say 4 point GPT 4.0 might be able to do right now. But that framing gave a window and a way of thinking about my own intentionality that was otherwise unavailable. And that's one of the things that I've kind of seen as a possibility for these systems since before we had GPT as like a terminology, right? Like even thinking about like the more statistical and inference based kind of applications of older machine learning type models. The idea of being able to see ourselves in a mirror. Shannon Valor, the philosopher of technology, works out of the University of Edinburgh. She has written the book called The AI Mirror. And the AI mirror in this space is a way of talking about what AI does and how it reflects back to us. And it's also a warning to recognize that it's not anything more than us. It distorts, it refracts and reflects, but at base, it's still, these are human intentions. And I look at that and I see in that the possibility of saying, yes, it is that. So let's get a real good look at what we are and what we're doing.
Oh, interesting. That also at an esoteric level, that makes me think about like if you're trying to figure out what to banish, what better way to get a portrait of it than by having it reflected back?
Yes.
Do you know what I mean? Like it's
put in what you can to get a clear picture, get a clear image of exactly what's there, and then you can recognize for yourself, hey, maybe that needs to go.
Yeah.
And that at an esoteric level, at a social level, at an ethical level, the level of bias in our systems and in our language, all of those things are possibilities of ways we could be using this. And I say that with the caveat of if we're going to do that, we still have to we still have to reckon with that environmental cost.
100%.
Still have to ask ourselves, how are we getting to that point? Because it still does damage currently to even look in that mirror.
Completely. Yeah, it does damage to look in the mirror. That's a that's a good line. It's a true line. I think there's also like it makes me think about if the in that Gnostic sense, if we're trying to transcend the limitations we're being given but through a demiurge or archons in a I'm very non-dogmatic in how I approach these things. I see them pretty loosely. But even if you are more hardcore about that, like the you won't be able to break open the archonic prison with the master's tools, but by getting a really good schematic of the prison might give you some escape routes. But know that there is a cost to that schematic,
Exactly.
Which means that like only maybe schematics for escape are valuable to ask for, and not like give me a write my blog for me,
Right. Exactly. And that question and that framing does, I think that it's important for us to kind of provoke ourselves in that way and say, what are we using this for?
Yeah.
What is the good of how we are using it? And what is the cost? Because there are costs and there are potential goods, but not necessarily sitting on a balanced scale,
Mm-hmm.
but we have to be very careful and very clear about all of them. We have to go into this knowing what we are doing, and
Exactly.
hopefully we have to be working towards something better that does far less harm than it does good.
Mm. That the one sort of last question I've got regarding possible use has been around, um, and like you kind of talked about the notion of it, of training, of choosing the data that you're training it on. I was
Mhm.
wondering about the notion of it being uh, like specifically a translation tool, like that if you're
Mm,
looking at uh, a body of text, particularly like ancient languages, where a lot of esotericists are going to be dealing with,
mhm,
or
mhm.
just other languages, is that like knowing that you're getting an incomplete picture, but because you're dealing with a translation, incompleteness is kind of baked in. Like I've often wondered if that's a
I have I have strong thoughts on translation, and this could go into again a much longer conversation about language. But
okay. We can put a pin in this.
yeah, I will just state for the framing for right now.
Hmm.
Yes, in any translation, you are dealing with incompleteness. However, the intentionality of that incompleteness matters.
Yes. Okay. Yeah.
And so when you look at what an AI type system, a translation model gets wrong, gets a
Hmm.
lot of things wrong in the same ways for a lot of the same reasons that we were talking about before.
Yeah. Yeah.
The kinds of choices that it makes in translation are going to tend towards what's represented in translation processes. What it has been
Hmm.
told are the translations, the most often used connotative transformations between
Hmm.
words and phrases. And if that is not populated by people who are native speakers and dual speakers or triplicate speakers of the languages in question,
Hmm.
people who actually live that language, who know those connotations, who don't just have like a textbook understanding of them, but who actually like live them,
Hmm.
then the textbook representations are the ones that are likely to get there, and they're likely to miss something very important.
That's a great point. Yeah, great. It was kind of on my mind as one of the few more viable
Like, it's again,
choices, but
it's a possibility, but it's
yeah.
a one that again you have to know for absolute sure that you are going to miss something, and possibly the
Mhm.
thing that you miss might be important.
Very much so. Yeah. Um, I think the last point here, because I think you've already given some great elements here as we draw to our close, is that I think one of the things I've found as a personal rule is that anything I've seen from these products tends to like my personal rule is that I think the person who is most invested in anything created by these systems is the person who asked for it,
Yeah,
and every other person who views it will only ever be a fraction of that interest. Like
yes,
you'll never find somebody who's loves your image generated thing more than you did, you
right,
know.
right,
Whereas I think art goes the other way, that
yeah,
like so often if you're uh like something that a writer, that a poet, that a painter will a choice that they won't even fully have like rationally made in a logical way will
mhm,
have had profound significance to someone else way beyond their expectations. That there's
yeah,
a that kind of goes back to what I was saying there before about my feeling that the what the human mind is doing with language is not at a token level that then goes up to language. It's at a diffuse level, like a higher level that's coming down to language, you
right,
know. um, and that when you're trying to generate these things with the idea of hoping that someone will like them, you're dealing with this. It's only ever going to be a fraction of your own interest. Whereas the thing you physically, or the thing that you intentionally make, like the text you actually generate, you know what I mean? The
right,
image you actually make, or even the image someone else actually made that you then find and use as your blog post image or what have you, is going to have more resonance just by
right,
its nature than the stable diffusion image or the Orphic poem that you've generated.
Right. And no, I
That
mean,
that's my theory. Yeah.
no, I find there's truth in that. Then I've seen that to be the case in other places as well. But it's one of those things where it's like maybe things will change at some point, and things will
Mhm.
shift in terms of how these things output images, text, etc., etc. But at present, the vast majority of the complaints that I see and take in from people who feel turned off by these systems is
Mhm.
about not feeling that resonance.
Mhm.
When it's not just about the consent or the environmental impact or all of the larger ethical problems,
Mhm.
even beyond those, the feeling of the thing itself for so many people just doesn't connect in the
Yeah.
same way
Yeah.
as it does when they can feel that sense of artistic engagement with a human being.
Mhm.
And that, there's things that show that shifts when people don't know it's created by a system versus when they
Mhm.
do, and like all of that. But like that feeling matters, and that sense of being inundated with this technology against our will
Mhm.
makes that feeling more pervasive more
Mhm.
often because people feel on edge of not having to wonder. Like, people don't want to have to wonder, is this AI? Is this thing that I'm looking at something that was AI created, or is it real? Was it
Mhm.
intended and meaningful to somebody, or was it just some slop that they, output from some random off the shelf website?
Mhm.
Because there's a cost. There's an emotional and mental cost in
Mhm.
investing with something and then feeling that investment uh, violated in a particular type
Mhm.
of way. And
Yeah.
I think that matters too.
There's the issue of am I looking at something that someone generated so that I will subscribe to their thing or generate them money? Do you know what I
Right.
mean? Like,
Right. Exactly.
um, versus something that someone wrote because they needed to communicate something.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
uh, I think, yeah, I think this has been an amazing conversation, and I hope we have a lot more really soon. And I think, yeah, the only other thing to mention is that I think you've been, we've sort of been saying this the whole way through, is that like using any of this technology is possible as long as you are aware
Right.
of what's involved, and as long as you are willing to acknowledge and engage with those things, because those issues are not invisible. Well, they've been made invisible, but they are not. Uh, they have not been made. Um, they have not been sanded away. Those biases are inside
Yes.
the system. The ethical problems are inside the system,
Yes.
um, and they are also not inevitable. Like
Exactly.
we are like, this is a technology that was designed by people to sell a thing. It is
Yes.
not a it is not the grand forces of history drawing us to ChatGPT.
Right.
Um,
A friend of mine put this a particular way the other day. Sometimes people need to know they have permission not to use these things. And I hereby grant anyone listening that permission. You have the permission to deny these systems, to remove
yeah.
them. You are not required. You are not beholden. These are not inevitable, and they are not inviolate. They are not handed down from on high. They are
Mhm.
systems that have weight behind them, but they are systems that can be changed. They
Yeah.
can be resisted, and they can be changed.
I think they can be resisted, they can be changed, and you can be part of that. And I think that is maybe a great place to end this phase of our conversation. But I'm looking forward to more. Damien, we're going to include links on the show notes for like one of your, at least one of your blogs that I found completely fascinating, but also like where to find you online. Is there anything else that you would want to say before we wrap things up here?
No, I think that's about everything. Thank you very much for having me on, and yeah, hopefully we get the opportunity to talk more in this vein and a bit further. going forward.
Excellent. I should have done this earlier because not everybody makes it to the end of the show, but and considering that I talked about the issues of how money gets involved in this stuff, it could be problematic, but we do have a Patreon. We do have a PayPal. You can find those things also on our show notes. If you've enjoyed the show, please share it with others. If you're interested in some of the subjects we talked about, say so in the comments. This is, again, those things that people say to drive engagement. But I really do think that there is a lack of discourse on the critical side of this stuff. So I really be excited for more discourse. And if this when this thing goes out, if that's a place that can happen, that'd be great. Damien, thank you so much. We're going to cut it out now, but I will say we'll talk to you again soon.
Thank you.